Hey, good morning, everybody. It is, I don't know what day of the week it is. It's Wednesday. It's busy week. It's a busy week. I'll be on an airplane to Minneapolis today in the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals tomorrow morning. So we won't be doing law and legitimacy. I've got an 8:30, whatever time zone that is, calendar call, and I'll be preoccupied. The issue we'll be arguing is whether pharmacies can refuse to fulfill the subscription of a physician, even when they confirm with the physician that this is what the physician wants. Mr. Salyer was prescribed ivermectin as a treatment for COVID-19. His doctor made a prescription. The pharmacy said, well, it's Walmart, why not? Walmart said, we don't want to do this. And so they called the doctor and they said, are you sure about this? He said, yes, I am. And they didn't do it anyhow. And so, pharmacists have a duty, not to act against the best interest of their clients. But do they have the duty to override a physician's judgment, and do they have a duty to override the informed consent of what takes place between a patient and physician? And we say no. Minnesota law says they probably do. We filed an action in federal court because there were citizens of different states. It was a diversity jurisdiction claim. And so we're going to challenge the Minnesota statute in the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, one step below the U.S. Supreme Court. And we'll argue more or less on substantive due process grounds. That is that while the law recognizes a pharmacist's duty and right to intervene, there's something more fundamental, and that is an individual's ability to, as they said in Casey versus Planned Parenthood, define their own conception of existence. And what more intimate relationship can you have between you and your physician when it comes time to making fundamental health decisions? So I won't be thinking about you all tomorrow morning. Mike and I talked about doing a double today and having something for tomorrow morning, but we're giving you all tomorrow morning off. And Luttrell, you need it because you're getting on earlier and earlier and earlier. 7:46 this morning. Good morning, Luttrell. Good morning, freedom lover. Good
morning to high society, my boy. Keep your head up.
Yeah, hard
show for you.
Some days it's harder to keep your head up than others. I was tootling along life's highway, feeling overwhelmed by the law and its responsibilities yesterday when I got a text from my wife that Cormac McCarthy had died. And, I'm going to be 68 in September. So death is obviously on my mind. I've got 4 grandchildren, 2 more on the way. Come the end of September, I'll have 6. I'm a patriarch suddenly. And there's nothing like watching your children have children that tells you, you're entering the last and final phase of your life, and enjoy it while you can. So Mike and I have talked about Cormac McCarthy and his recent volume, 2 volumes to the Passengers. The first, I'm going to read from a bit of it in a moment. And here he was at 89, still knocking out works of compelling prose. And now he's dead, just like that. Just like all of us will be in time. And it makes you wonder about the larger pattern of things. This is a week where he died, and is it coincidental that he and Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, died? These were both men who devoted their lives to a dark and compelling set of truths. Kaczynski about the role, perhaps, of technology and in getting between us and our spiritual sense of self, our sense of vocation. And he took steps that the law obviously can't tolerate, killed people, reacted in violence, and was locked away for the rest of his life in a federal supermax. And then there's Cormac McCarthy, who portrayed that what the obit writers this morning are calling darkness in the world. And I chuckle when I see that. The Times, I think, in their obit this morning on the front page called him a dark loner. I called him an honest man, maybe the last honest man. I want to read to you from a little bit of his latest novel, The Passenger. It's a long passage, and we'll maybe do an interpretive reading. He's got a debate between a couple people discussing their view about the world, and one says to the other, you don't see any disjunct between what you know about the world and what you believe about God? Interlocutor responds, I don't believe anything about God. I just believe in God. Think about that for a moment. I mean, if you're asked to defend the proposition that God exists, you'll fall into an infinite logic game. And the logic will never get you to the point of proof. It'll get you to the point of suggestion, but it's the heart that responds. McCarthy writes, I just believe in God. Kant had it right about the stars above and the truth within. Immanuel Kant's great line, two things filled him with awe, the starry heavens above and the moral law within. That's what he's referring to. McCarthy goes on, the last light the non-believer will see will not be the dimming of the sun. It'll be the dimming of God. Everyone is born with the faculty to see the miraculous. You have to choose not to. And he was so right about that. I mean, the world is filled with wonder. When you get beyond yourself and your need to appear to be competent in the social world, or when you get beyond the need to navigate between the various responsibilities you have in your life, it's impossible not to just look back and say, wow, what is this place? And what a privilege it is to be alive. Everyone is born with the faculty to see the miraculous. You have to choose not to. You think that is God's patience is infinite? I think we're probably almost there. I think the odds are that we'll be here. Excuse me, let me try it in English, which he mastered. I think the odds are on that we'll still be here to see him wet his thumb, lean over and unscrew the sun. And, his death just leaves me gasping. I turn to literature and the Bible and the written word as a source of solace in a world in which, at least as I experience it, there are competing and overwhelming demands. And the sense that of God's presence in the world sustains me because I know that I'm not sufficient to meet the needs that the day brings. And so a writer like McCarthy, who resolutely faced the darkness and the uncertainty with the hope that a writer has, the hope that the book will sell, that it'll be compelling, that he will be heard. McCarthy, for all his darkness, never lost the sense of hope. And he embodied the tragic sense of life that we're all called to live if we live responsibly. Yes, we're born to die. Yes, no one gets out of here alive. Yes, the world is dark, but there's hope as long as there's life. But then suddenly there's no life. And Cormac is gone. The Unabomber is gone. A good friend of mine, Jim Nugent, you've heard him on the show, his father died this week. It seems that some weeks the world just falls away and we're left shuddering in a dark wind against the hope that we will not soon expire ourselves. Cherish today, folks. Carpe diem. This is Cormac's death. I just can't tell you how much it overwhelmed me. He had a wonderful line in one of his best books, a quick and accessible book for those of you who are new to McCarthy. It's The Road. It's the story of a father and son traveling after some apocalyptic event in the world. They're trying to head south, where they reason, the father does at least, that the odds of survival will be greater than where they are. And along the way, they see horrible things, which I think anyone who's awake will see in their own lives, as well as things of wonder. And the little boy turns to his dad and said, Dad, what's the point of it all? What's the point of life? And the father looks at him and says, basically, son, you just go and go until you can't go anymore. Cormac McCarthy cannot go anymore. And my world is poorer for it. And whether you know it or not, yours is as well, because an honest life well lived in the face of uncertainty, in the face of sorrow, in the face of hopes that cannot help but to be broken. An honest life lived courageously in the face of those odds is a life worth admiring. And so we give our gratitude to Cormac McCarthy, who, if he exists in a form that we can't reach. If he can hear, the words probably won't mean much to him. My sense is he's probably gone from this life to eternal darkness, from which there is no recovery. I have a faith, maybe a hope that there is something to come, but that's a faith that sustains me, and a faith that I wonder sometimes might just be a way of coping with how unbelievably grim the human condition is. So on that happy note.
Well, look, we have on the screen here, this is from cormacmccarthy.com. And this is, I guess, a eulogy from the webmaster here of the website. And I want to read just a couple of quick things. It says, Cormac McCarthy died today in Santa Fe. This is yesterday, June 13th, 2023. New Mexico, of natural causes. The news is confirmed by his son, John, his publisher, in the New York Times. He was 89. I say all of that because there's been at least one Twitter death hoax previously. And he says, as webmaster of this site, I always figured I should write something about McCarthy's death because I would have to have it on one day on short notice. That day has now come and I'm not prepared. And I'm skipping down here. So he says, as for me, I'm going to shamelessly steal the line about Lincoln from Civil War era Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. Now he belongs to the ages. Or one of my favorite short McCarthy quotes from The Road. Borrowed time and borrowed world and borrowed eyes with which to sorrow it. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. And it's true. Now, off we go. Farewell, Cormac McCarthy. Thank you. Thank you for shedding light on the darkness that lives within us all and that we all have to master in the name of integrity. So Donald Trump wasn't doing a lot of talking yesterday. He apparently appeared for his arraignment and didn't even address the court. His lawyer entered a guilty plea for him, saying he most resolutely or certainly pleads not guilty. But he had plenty to say thereafter at a press conference. Those of you who fear the apocalypse as a result of all things Trump are probably disappointed. Or maybe those of you who want the apocalypse as regards all things Trump are probably disappointed. The courthouse wasn't stormed. There wasn't a riot. The Constitution, every comma, jot, and tittle in the Constitution didn't fly off the page, leaving a series of meaningless strokes on paper that, offer no guidance. And this is the worst of all possible worlds. He just went into court and did what defendants do. He pled not guilty. The case will be now set for trial. He's having trouble looking for lawyers. I've got a lot of phone calls. Has Trump called? I said, no, I doubt he will. I've not exactly had, a great run in the last couple of years. I mean, Alex Jones got defaulted. I stood next to him at a trial in which he was tagged for $1.5 billion in damages. Not exactly, what you post on your webpage and say, come to me. And then, the Proud Boys was a devastating loss. We fought it as well as we could, and we've got an appeal pending in the Jones case. The Proud Boys will soon be sentenced. But I obviously I'd like to be called, but secretly I'm relieved not to be called. I've sort of had a couple years of extremely difficult cases in extremely demanding circumstances with extremely demanding clients. Alex Jones is not an easy man. Something tells me that Donald would be all that on crack, and I wish his lawyers well. I hope he'll listen. I think the chuckling I'm hearing from people around the country is he better have a checkbook, because Donald is known not to pay his bills. He wants you to represent him on promises, promises are nice, but getting paid is better.
Indeed it is.
So what does the NCAA have a hotness problem? And if so, good. What's going on? What's going on with the Cavinder Twins?
Pull up a story here on the screen from the Free Press and one Ethan Strauss. The title of the article is called "The NCAA Has a Hot Girl Problem." And I think it's interesting that we're talking about this. The basic premise of the article here, it does two things. It's one, to highlight the value that Haley and Hannah Cavinder, who you see there on the screen, objectively gorgeous 22-year-old University of Miami graduates, former members of the University of Miami's basketball team. Prior to that, they transferred out of a California-based school, and that was driven by their meteoric rise in popularity via social media during the COVID 2020 lockdowns. So while all of these college athletes were at home and quarantined, these two sisters struck a vein via online by, making a TikTok account, a joint TikTok account, and posting a synchronized video of them to a popular song, doing a few sort of basketball calisthenics drills, right? And from there, the rest is history. They're now, I think that they earned in excess of $2 million last year, in calendar year 2022. They have, an attorney on staff. They have obviously an agent. They are doing deals with many of the companies like Better, BETR, and other big name entities that are using money and tagging influencers to help elevate the brands. Many of these brands overlap with professional athletes in the NFL, the NBA, et cetera. But the purpose of this article is really to highlight how they have exploited the vein that is name, image, and likeness behind the Supreme Court's decision to basically tell universities that they could not withhold scholarships for student athletes. That decision ultimately is what manifested or yielded this sort of temporary rule change that the NCAA created, called the name, image, and likeness rule. And now we know that is, that was never really intended to be temporary. But what we know is that the NCAA didn't really have a well conceptualized framework to regulate NIL stuff for college athletes, for NCAA member student athletes. And the other part of this article is to illustrate the point that these two young ladies, Haley and Hannah, while beautiful and while very successful monetarily and professionally at this point, were nowhere near the cream of the crop when it came to what the University of Miami's basketball team had to put on the floor. And that is the essence of this article. The essence of this article is saying that, yes, they are hot. Yes, they are making a lot of money, but they're not that good at the game by comparison to their peers. And the author says this is a problem. Now, Norm, before we go any further, I'd like to put something on the screen that I told you about before we started this morning. I went over to one of the Cavinder Twins Twitter pages, and you see here Haley has retweeted her sister Hannah. And about 13 hours ago, Hannah quoted the article that I was just talking about on the screen and posted this statement, which says, among other things, that the interview that Ethan Strauss did in the article that he subsequently published, but the interview for the article was actually obtained by false pretenses. So it's now her and her sister's position that the article actually, quote, demeaned our athletic and business accomplishment. It furthered the narrative that hardworking, creative, and driven women can only do well if they are deemed attractive. The piece disregards our work ethic and dedication towards NIL and business endeavors. He fails to acknowledge the young girls/women that follow us and that we work so hard to inspire. Instead, he degrades us down to hot girls. We agreed to do the interview and wanted to support a woman-ran news outlet. We are both disappointed and disgusted by this journalism practice and blatant sexist trope. We only wish to inspire young women to chase their dreams, work hard, think big. Now we must also defend them against men that wish to sum their potential to physical appearance, end quote. And I read that for a couple of reasons. One,
they hadn't spent a lot of time in the library. It's young women, plural, please.
Well,
not
and
young
that's
women.
exactly what I was getting at, Norm. So you know me. I've made my position on paying student athletes clear. And I think that I'm refining my position after conversations with people that I know, love, and trust. And it's not that I've changed my mind, but just to further narrow in on what I believe the problem to be. I think that institutions are failing in their primary objective of educating students at institutions. Higher learning education or institutions of higher learning are outright en masse and on average failing to deliver competent education to its students. Period. That's what I believe. And I also believe that because of that the term student athlete is ultimately meaningless. Because if Hannah and Haley respectively have graduated, which they have, and they were student athletes at the University of Miami, which ostensibly has a pretty rigorous intellectual or academic backbone. It has its own law school, right? I'm not unaware if it has a med school or any of these other things, but I assume that based on how well funded it is and its repute, that it has a number of professional schools attached to it. But if these two have graduated, and as they're quoted throughout this article, I'll put that back on the screen. The best they can do to wrong article there. Let's see, here it is. The best they can do to say is that this is about women and sort of a second wave feminism appeal. This is in and of itself proof positive that even the most valuable among the student athletes, even though they're not the best ones on the floor, still aren't doing much to, I guess, be part of the educated demographic that wield degrees, Norm. So I'll leave it there, let you kind of weigh in, and we can steer the conversation a little more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what we've been debating on the NIL thing. I mean, my view is that I see the comment from In the Cloud. They're entrepreneurs. That's a problem, and maybe that is the via media here. I mean, they're entrepreneurs. They're selling what they've got. And what they've got, they are hot girls. I mean, I'm looking at the picture of them. They may not be my type. I mean, they could stand to eat a little bit, and they look a little anorexic. But they've got curves where they're supposed to have curves. And I'd rather look at these two than a couple of the porkers that I see in the Fat is Beautiful movement. And if that reflects poorly on me, it does, and I'll take the light. I'll take the hit.
There it is, Norm. There it is. So throughout this article, and I do encourage everyone to go and read it. This is on the Free Press. You can find it, just by a basic web search. But what is astounding to me is that these two young women have absolutely nothing to hold their heads over or to worry about. But this article is plagued with interview questions that force them into an academic or cultural domain that they clearly lack any real self-awareness or forethought. And I
wonder why. They're whining about giving the interview under false pretenses. They gave the interview to enhance their brand. And it's not that, nobody interviewed these young women to find out what they thought about the NBA finals or the skill of players. Nobody interviewed these people to talk about the latest book they've read. When they did their TikTok account, which I've never seen, presumably people were looking at them because they were eye candy. And so they've become, they're attacking others for noticing that they've become the trope they don't want to be identified as. Oh, well, I mean, nobody gets out of here alive. They made, you told me they made a couple $1 million last year, and they made a couple $1 million for doing what? Being second stringers on a team and looking pretty. And then they want to criticize people for saying that's what they did. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's a hot girl problem. I'm not sure what the point of the article was. I'm not sure that there is a problem. I think they're entrepreneurs. They sold it while they've got it. If they're trying to inspire other young women, I'm not sure what they're trying to inspire them to do. I guess
here's what I'm trying to get at then. This is where the political right is absolutely tone deaf and loses the culture war, because these are two 22-year-old young women who have hit the genetic lottery as far as I'm concerned. They're gorgeous, objectively so, right? And they have struck a vein where they are able to monetize, because number one, this article is like, hey, they're not as good as some of their counterparts in Division I sports. Okay, cool. However, they're still on a Division I women's program at the highest level, right? In the Atlantic Coast Conference. So despite what everybody else would like to say, Tobacco Road is what the ACC is built on top of. Miami has to compete with the likes of UNC and NC State and Duke every single season. So even if these two young ladies aren't the best on their team or don't have a track to the WNBA, number one, who cares about going to the WNBA? That's a pay cut for them. Why would they consider that to be an avenue that they should develop their skills around? But number two, there is an opportunity just by reading the quotes that are in this article for the political right to reassert things like merit and ambition and an unapologetic attitude about being competitive and wanting to win. These women are stuck between being extraordinarily successful, hitting the genetic lottery, but then also possessing this sort of like over-socialized shame for the other people, for the lessers, right? The people that don't do as well as them. And that's a problem that's endemic to an entire generation of young student athletes and young people generally, right? These are the Zoomers, as they're termed. I think my problem is recognizing that they're not even being educated to the point where they could be critical of the questions they're being asked. They're not even being taught how to think for themselves, let alone have any sort of academic rote knowledge about random stuff or what books they're reading, Norm. My problem is that this is a complete manifestation of the system trying to drag something that broke out of it back into it.
Maybe I just, you might be overthinking it,
I don't think I am.
or I'm not thinking hard enough about it. I'm
Yeah.
just looking at it as proof of the maxim that all men are pigs. I mean, if beauty is a social construct, you talk about them hitting the genetic lottery. So apparently these two are of a type that you respond to viscerally, and they were savvy enough to realize that they had that to market, so they marketed it. What gave them a platform and what gave them an entree is, we're also student athletes, and so they didn't have to go to a porn site to hawk their flesh. They just hawk it in a more socially acceptable way. But like a porn star, they're dealing with a social construct and appealing to some universal instinct that folks have to respond to attractive and appealing young women. And that just seems to me the beginning and the end of it. What does it have to do with University of Miami?
Well, the fact that University of Miami was fined because they were transfers, they met with this billionaire, then, who was, close to the boosters. They got brought in, then the NCAA fined the school, and then the head coach had to sit out for 3 games. There's a lot of context at the back of this.
All right.
That I guess highlights the hypocrisy of the NCAA and just the total feckless nature of that organization. And I guess this is a neat transition to the notion of administrative deference, but we'll get there in a second. But my thing is simply this. The NIL stuff will be more tightly regulated in years to come. The NCAA is not going to sit on its hands and feel like it's losing parity in the game because there are students that are realizing that they don't actually need sports as the lone vessel for them.
Well, that's true.
To have their sort of, to have their cake and eat it too moment. Right. And then, but this is also in the interim, the political right is missing a major opportunity to counter signal against this sort of collectivist attitude of ugly people trying to bring down those who are simply winners. And these 2 girls, no matter how you slice it, are winners, and they have each other. And I don't think that they have anything to be ashamed of. So Haley, Hannah, if you hear this and you need a better agent or a better attorney to help you with some talking points and just act as a de facto publicist, you can reach me, Michael at carolinacraftlegal.com. Happy as hell to talk to you about how to counter signal against all of this stuff.
Well, and my advice to them is just be yourselves. If the market's responding, why ask why? And critics are a dime a dozen. And like young ladies, if you don't have haters, you're not living. So, I can speak from experience there. Well, what's this about administrative deference, Mike? What's going on in North Carolina right now?
Well, I think it's less about what's going on in North Carolina, but we will use North Carolina, and more about, I think, Norm, what you are expecting to see from the Supreme Court as this docket continues to change. So I think the central thesis here is perhaps the Chevron deference and what that is. So do you mind starting with the Chevron doctrine and Chevron deference and what's on the table at the Supreme Court?
So, we've talked ad nauseum on this show, and we'll continue to do so because it's fundamental to the American experience about constitutional law. And the Constitution divides power, fractures it within government and between governments. So federalism says that there is a zone of law that that goes to it belongs to the states, as it were. There are limited enumerated powers that are supreme that goes to the federal government. The separation of powers doctrine says that within the federal government and most state governments, there are 3 branches of government: the judiciary that decides what the law is and decides cases and controversies, legislators that make rules that the rest of us are expected to follow in the form of laws, and administrators who carry out those laws. That's a very simplistic view of government. In the 20th century, the administrative state blossomed, and we have what many people refer to as a headless 4th branch of government: administrative agencies who decide what the law means in given context. And Congress will give an administrative agency a broad mandate, and the executive branch may create an agency and give it a broad mandate to regulate in the public welfare. People who feel aggrieved by those decisions often turn to the courts and say, wait a minute. Well, they used to say non-delegation doctrine, Congress can't delegate its authority. There's some pushback, and that doctrine maybe is being revived in our time. But the courts have typically said, under Chevron and others, we're going to defer to the expertise of these agencies, and we're not going to second guess their judgment. You saw an example of this in the Clean Water Act case that the Supreme Court recently decided, where agencies were given deference to decide what the waters of the United States were. And they evolved a doctrine in which every pond in the country was connected to something else in some holistic way. And thus waters of the United States were the waters in your backyard, even though you were 100 miles from a navigable river. And the Supreme Court said, no, there's got to be limits. We're going to check agency deference, because the point of having limited government was to make room for people to be free. And when the experts decide everything, what's left for us to do other than obey? And that's not the American experience. Administrative deference, then, that concept, is a court's reluctant to second guess the decision of a body, an administrative body that has the ability to regulate some significant area in life.
So North Carolina is I guess an emerging battleground for this, and I'm not sure that the facts of the case that we have here are necessarily those, and I share this with you, Norm, necessarily those that I would want any sort of departure from the administrative deference that you're describing to be based on. But we do have the John Locke Foundation, and one of the higher ups in the John Locke Foundation submitting what is known as an amicus brief, or a friend of the court brief, to the North Carolina Supreme Court, urging them to take up the appeal of the case called Mitchell v. University of North Carolina Board of Governors. And the brief factual history is that the petitioner is a terminated Winston-Salem State University professor. And the nature of the action is that essentially the university itself, which is a part of the University of North Carolina school system, that's why it's University of North Carolina Board of Governors, Winston-Salem State University is part of that broader system. The narrow issue here is whether someone in the university's position can be a judge in its own case, right? So effectively, the university terminated the professor. Like I said, the facts are leave a little to be desired. I understand that the professor was pretty unlikable, routinely caused issues within faculty and staff there. The police were dispatched to at least one encounter there at the school. There was some sort of absence from teaching one class. I don't know if it was an online course or otherwise. Regardless, the school went through its, procedural steps to terminate the professor, and the professor appealed that within the boundaries that I guess were afforded to him through that administrative process. And it is that the school was tasked with reviewing its own decision that forms the basis of this request that the Supreme Court, the North Carolina Supreme Court, act to hedge against this sort of administrative deference or do away with it altogether. I am generally in support, Norm, of getting away from administrative deference, and I think that this relates entirely to the topic of academia in the United States. It is most often the case that in my day-to-day life as an attorney, the bane of my existence is dealing with mid to low level specialists, as they're called at administrative agencies, making up some of the most menial of protocols affecting otherwise compliant businesses within the state, and unnecessarily, and what I believe unlawfully, is usually impeding their path to commerce and through commerce. So for that reason, my thought is that these positions are much too protected, that the scope creep that scope creep is often a feature, not necessarily a bug of the system, because those that are in positions like other attorneys and other administrators of these agencies are buffered through the bureaucratic red tape, this sort of like swampiness that is this specialist team within these agencies, and their ability to just slow everything down unnecessarily and without any respect or understanding of the commercial situation, the business situation on the outside that these businesses must attend to, right?
So I think that the case, this may not be the classic Chevron case. Chevron usually has to do with an application of some technical aspect of a regulatory affair where the regulator is expected to have expertise that Congress couldn't acquire and the courts can't appreciate. This strikes me more as a due process kind of thing. Can anyone be a judge in their own case? So let's keep an eye on that decision.
And I agree wholeheartedly with that. I think that in my own experience, kind of going back to what I was speaking on just then, is that it's most often the case that, say, for example, you're a business in North Carolina operating with a permit issued by a specific administrative agency, and that agency, on the basis of allegations or a notice of certain violations of relevant law, summarily suspends and then petitions to revoke your permit and your authorization to conduct business in that category, and as you've built around it. These things manifest as violations of due process, but it's the most obvious in my world that is the issue, except the administrative deference afforded to these agencies to be able to make these initial determinations is the real problem. Right?
Well, it could be that the North Carolina Supreme Court will have an opportunity to draw a line between due process or procedural fairness issues and the substantive agency expertise issues. Let's keep an eye on this case. I read the Locke Foundation's petition for permission to argue, and it really was awful. I mean, John Locke is not happy with you folks. You need to step up your game. That read like an undergraduate term paper. It didn't read like a persuasive piece of writing. Let's end with some words from Cormac McCarthy's, because that we opened today with that. Life is hard, folks, and Cormac was a master of difficulty. Here's one of the things he had one of his his protagonists say in one of his last novels. And these are words that all of you should take to heart. Austerity lifts the heart and focuses the vision. Travel light. A few ideas are enough. Every remedy for loneliness only postpones it. And the day is coming in which there'll be no remedy at all. I wish you calm waters. I always did. Thanks for listening to Law and Legitimacy, folks. We'll be back Friday. Tomorrow's an off day. Enjoy your time off. Come back with lots of questions. Ask us anything. We won't have answers because we're good Cormac McCarthyites, but we will have the hope for clarity. And that's all that you can ask for in this life.
Thank you, Norm. And as you said, we will be back Friday. That is, we are going to take a rare repose tomorrow, Thursday, June 15th. So please use that time to get caught up on any of the streams that you've missed. Run over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, catch them there, rate us 5 stars, and we will be back Friday, 8 a.m. Eastern time, right here on Rumble, YouTube, and Twitter. Norm, have a good day. I will see you on Friday.
You will.